Hello, I'm Marcus Railton, and welcome back to the second series of the ScotsCare podcast. ScotsCare is the only charity dedicated to helping disadvantaged Scots in London through a range of support, including financial grants, advocacy, counselling and sheltered housing for older Scots, job coaching, social events, befriending and support for children and families. The charity's been running for 400 years to help break the cycle of poverty experienced by some Scots. In the new series, I'll be chatting with guests from all walks of life, from celebrities and authors, athletes and actors, business entrepreneurs to academics, all with one thing in common: Scots heritage. And they enjoy a good blether.
No less than an MBE on the podcast today. Journalist and sports broadcaster Jill Douglas joins me to talk many things, actually. We started off chatting about where she grew up, which was on a farm on the borders of Scotland. She explained how she got her first break as a newspaper reporter, before going on to, well, another break actually, presenting the snooker, when the Green Baize was dominated by the likes of Jimmy Whirlwind White and Alex Hurricane Higgins and Steve Davis, and Dennis Taylor with his upside-down glasses. Another first for Jill Douglas was presenting the rugby. Up until that point, most rugby, in fact all rugby, had been presented by older men. So to have a young woman doing this back in the 90s was quite an unusual thing. We spoke about that and how she dealt with that and how she stayed objective when she had to interview ex-international player Carl Hogg, who also turned out to be her husband. Jill was very open about her good friend, the late great Doddie Weir, an amazing rugby player, a giant of a man on and off the pitch. I remember his remarkable tartan suits. Doddie died very young due to motor neuron disease, and we spoke about the My Name's Doddie charitable foundation and the great work that it does. We also chatted about Jill's own highly pragmatic attitude to life. She is not a worrier, and that's an enviable position to be in, and she explains why. So here we go with Jill Douglas on the ScotsCare podcast.
ScotsCare, the charity helping to break the cycle of poverty some Scots find in London.
Hello.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
And you?
Look at us recording a podcast at 9 o'clock in the morning.
I know, ridiculous.
So we're doing this, we're recording this at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I said, do you fancy doing the ScotsCare podcast? And you said, yeah, can we do 9 o'clock? And it was a wee bit of a shock to my system. Are you, although I don't mean to sound boastful, but I have taken the kids to school and hung a washing out. So are you an early riser?
I am very much an early riser, even though I was quite a late night, because I'm working on the snooker this week with ITV. And so I start work at about 10:30, get in about 11, looking at scripts, getting made up, getting ready for the show. We go on air at 1:45, and then we sometimes don't come off air till about midnight. So this is the only time I've got of the day to do anything other than snooker. So that's why I said 9 o'clock.
Oh, well, I do appreciate that. It's a long working day, though. That's a very long shift, isn't it?
It is, but it's good fun. You know, work with great people: Stephen Hendry, Alan McManus, Neil Folds, Ken Doherty. The ITV crew are brilliant, and the players are brilliant. So yeah, we do a sort of afternoon match, afternoon session. Usually get finished about 5. Then we have about an hour off, and then we go again. So yeah, but it's like a week-long tournament, and then we've got a few days, and then we've got another tournament. So we do about 5 weeks of snooker a year on ITV. It's I really enjoy it, but they are long days.
See, now you and I are about the same age, and I think when I was growing up, and I must admit, I don't see snooker anymore, and I think it's just because of the way my lifestyle is. But when I was growing up in the kind of 70s and 80s, it did seem like a kind of golden era. You know, Alex Higgins, Steve Davis, Stephen Hendry, Jimmy White, Ray Reardon, you know, who looked a bit like Dracula to me when I was a kid. And was that a golden era, or is it just something I kind of remember? Because I seem to watch it all the time and loved it.
I think the snooker now is probably of a higher quality, and you know the players today are the likes of your Judd Trumps and your Neil Robertsons and your Mark Selby's and obviously Ronnie O'Sullivan, who is the greatest snooker player of all time. Fact. I don't think anybody would argue with that. So you've got like amazing stars of the game now, and the way it's taken off in China, it's now seen much more as a sort of global sport. I think what we think about when we think back to the 80s, and the likes of Stephen Hendry and Steve Davis, Reardon, Terry Griffiths,
Yes.
Dennis Taylor, all of these guys, there were only 3 or 4 TV channels. And so when the snooker was on, you really didn't have any option. You watched the snooker because in my house, my dad watched the snooker, so we watched the snooker. And so we kind of have that affection for it because it was on and it went on until it finished. It was on, it seemed to be incessant. You never felt like ever came to an end. But I think there was very limited choice then, whereas now, there are so many options how we watch television, how we engage with our screens. It's quite different to what it was then. So, when we were watching the likes of Terry Griffiths winning his world title, or when Stephen came on the scene, you had 15 million, 20 million people watching. It's a very different world that we inhabit today. So I think that's why we have this kind of connection with it, with Hurricane Higgins and the whirlwind Jimmy White and these great characters who really did, inspire a lot of the snooker players that we see in action today at the top of the game.
You're right. You've absolutely hit the nail on the head. That's what it is. I have very fond memories of like watching, because everybody thought Steve Davis was quite boring, and then I remember seeing him on the Terry Wogan show and finding that he had a real kind of smart, funny personality. And I remember seeing Jimmy White getting a 147 break, and I remember Dennis Taylor with his upside down glasses, and that was all these things that really stick in my head. And then like you say, Ronnie O'Sullivan, he for me was, although kind of Jimmy White and Alex Higgins were kind of almost like old school rock and roll, Ronnie O'Sullivan was the kind of first Noel Gallagher 90s rock and roll snooker star for me, I think.
Yeah, and what a talent, like a genius. When you see what he could do on the snooker table, really, he's like the Roger Federer of snooker, and he sort of transcends snooker in a way, because of his longevity, but also his abilities. He could just turn it off, turn it on like that. I mean, just incredible to watch. And when he was in the groove, when he was in that zone, and he was strutting around that table playing, and he was unplayable if you were his opponent, you couldn't take your eyes off him. Could not take the charisma that he brought to the sport, and he still continues to do that. I mean, he doesn't play as much these days, but he's still, on his day, the best in the world. I mean, it's ridiculous how talented he is.
As a comparison to somebody like Roger Federer, I think, tennis is one of these sports where you do have quite a short shelf life. By the time you're in your early 30s, you're almost done. I presume you've got a longer shelf life in snooker, but then what happens? Do you go off the boil, or do you lose the impetus? Or, I mean, what age did Stephen Hendry always seemed such a very, very young man, but he's probably my age. He's probably early 50s.
I think Stephen's 56. So, and he stepped back when he started losing, really, when he was finding that he wasn't winning matches as much. But if you look at guys like Mark Williams is 50 today. Actually, is today Friday?
Yeah.
Right. Mark Williams is 50 today, and he's the class of 92. So Mark Williams, John Higgins, Ronnie O'Sullivan all turned professional in 1992. Mark Williams is still winning tournaments. John Higgins is still winning tournaments. They both won tournaments this year. And obviously Ronnie O'Sullivan is who Ronnie O'Sullivan is. So I think kind of that age is probably where you're beginning to wonder how long you're going to carry on. Mark Williams just said this week that he's really struggling with his eyesight. So I think when your eyes go, then you're going to struggle as a snooker player. But they are kind of the exception, I think. Once you get into sort of your 40s, a lot of the snooker players step away. But there's so many young players coming through, sort of late teens, early 20s, particularly from China. There's huge numbers of Chinese players coming through, really talented as well. So, it's fun. And Judd Trump, who's the world number one at the minute, he's in his mid-30s. He's still got, a lot of snooker in him. But he's, an exceptional talent as well. So I think you can play probably into your sort of early 50s, and then maybe they take a view about whether they carry on.
Look, what I want to do is I want to go back to the beginning, actually, because I didn't realize this, but I could probably talk to you about snooker all day. But I want to go back and talk to you about where you were born, you were born in Bonchester Bridge near the Scottish borders. And what was your childhood like? Did you have an average upbringing?
So I was born in Hawick,
Like,
and grew up on the family farm, which is near Bonchester Bridge in the Scottish borders. And youngest of Henry and Aileen's three kids, Henry, my dad, and Aileen. I had like the perfect kind of childhood, I suppose, because I was on a farm, so you had such freedom. Um, and yeah, really just great. I'm still incredibly close to my brother and sister. My brother's still on the farm. We had ponies and dogs and work helped on the farm. It didn't feel like work. We were just kind of trailing about after my dad, doing whatever we needed to do. We had lots of people coming and going, very sociable family. So my dad also is a singer, so we had lots of music in the house and folk artists and lots of people coming and going. It was just constantly busy. There was never a dull day on the farm. So yeah, I was blessed actually, and went to the village school, which was really small. So there was only about, I think, 40 or 50 kids in the whole school
wow,
from
okay.
primary one all the way up to primary seven. So, um, and we're all kind of farmers' kids and people that worked on the farms or in the forestry. So yeah, we had a great time as kids, and still go back up to the farm and love it there. And yeah, many happy memories of growing up there. And then I used to go into Hawick to watch the rugby team play every Saturday. So that was kind of where my sort of, I guess, passion for rugby began, really, by going to watch Hawick on a Saturday play.
So did you have to? I ask you this because I was talking to the Hebridean baker a few weeks ago, and he was talking about. And I'm going to get this wrong. He was either born in Shetland or Stornoway, but he said he went to a little school like that, 40 or 50 kids. And then when he came to go to high school or secondary school, he had to leave the island and go to a boarding school. And they all went there. And he said he hated it. And he said, so what was your secondary school like? Were you able to come back and forth, or were you too remote for that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I went to Jedburgh Grammar School. So Jedburgh's about 10 miles from Bonchester. So it's a tiny little town, Jedburgh, just over the Carter Bar, beautiful town with an old abbey and Mary Queen of Scots house, very historic. And the grammar school that I went to had, I think it maybe had 350 kids, if that. And they all came from little rural village schools, and a few from the town itself. But I mean, Jedburgh's population is probably, I don't know, 3 or 4,000. So
Yeah.
again, it was quite an easy step. And I knew some of the kids went up at the same time from my primary school. And so, yeah, the biggest thing about moving to the grammar school was it used to take us like about an hour and a half to get there, even though it was just so close, because we had to walk nearly 2 miles to get one bus, and then the next bus dropped us off, and then we got another bus. And so the days were really long. But
Yeah.
sometimes but I was only at school for a short time with my brother, who's the oldest, because he was much older than me and he left. But when he was still at the same school as me, we used to get onto a motorbike, the three of us on this motorbike, and instead of walking to get the bus, and then we would hide the motorbike in the woods and then get the motorbike home. So yeah, it was good fun.
Did your dad know this at the time? That's the kind of thing as a parent would terrify you nowadays, isn't it?
I know. I think Dad was just like, get on with it. I mean, but we were driving on the farm when you could barely touch the pedals of tractors and Land Rovers. So I think it was just a case of crack on.
That's brilliant. So there must have been a bit of a culture shock for you then to go from that to going to Edinburgh and going to Napier. So that was a kind of big step. And at that point, did you know, was your ambition to become a newspaper reporter?
Very much so. So I think from primary school age, I had my sights set on being a journalist, because I went to see the Hawick News, which was the local paper, on a school trip, and saw them laying the pages out, the hot metal pages, and talking to the journalists. And I thought, I was very curious as a kid, constantly asking questions. I thought this actually could work for me. And then when I went up to the senior school, I met the editor of the local weekly newspaper, the Southern Reporter, and told him that I wanted to be a journalist. He came to a careers convention or something, and he offered me a job really quickly. And I said, no, I'm staying on to do my exams. And then he offered me another job, and I said, no, and I did work experience, and I kept saying I wanted to go and study. And then I was about to start Edinburgh University, to do a degree in history and politics and was weeks away from starting. And he called me in, the editor, for another meeting, and he said, look, I'll send you to Napier. You can do your professional exams, but you'll have a job here at the paper as well. So that's what I did. And so it was, yeah, it was like an easy transition. And a lot of my friends were in Edinburgh, so it was quite an easy thing to do. So I was a student in Edinburgh, but equally working for the paper at the same time. So the big step for me was just getting involved in working for a newspaper and understanding what the life of proper paid work looked like. It was a bit of a shock to the system, I think. And then it just went from there. So I was really lucky. I met some great people who gave me opportunities. I started doing a little bit of freelance work for the Daily Record and Border Television, and it took off from there. But yeah, I like the Southern Reporter is where my grounding came from, and John Smale, the editor there, gave me my sort of first start.
ScotsCare, the charity helping to break the cycle of poverty some Scots find in London.
Do you know what I wanted to ask you about is homework, really? Because I used to work for Setanta Sports. You probably remember them, and then they kind of went bust. And I was never very good. And I was on I think I find it complicated because I was on the Dutch League, the Eredivisie League, and the Bundesliga. So everything was not natural. It was something that I had to do a lot of homework for, and I found I struggled with it a lot of time. And I think you make that look very easy, because I kind of try and watch you on the telly when you're doing complex sport like cycling. I know people might say cycling is not a complex sport, but cycling is a very complex sport, and you make it look like, and you almost have been talking about it all your life, but you make it look extraordinarily easy. Is that because you have a natural knack, or is it because it goes back to those days at the Southern Reporter? You just do homework.
Some of it is doing your prep and understanding what's coming up and the narrative of what you're seeing and the context of it. So some of it you just have to do the prep. You need to read do the notes, do the research. Some of it is because you've been doing it for such a long time, you've got that kind of inbuilt knowledge. But I think if you're excited by what you're working in, it's not actually work at all. It's just you being engaged in something that really interests you and brings a lot of joy and excitement to your life. So with something like rugby, I kind of grew up with it, and I understood the game and knew the characters. And so that was a kind of natural move for me. When I started working in the cycling world, I did have to do a bit of initial hard work to really understand the different disciplines. But I've always been somebody who asks lots of questions. And so I always find somebody who knows more than I do and sit them down and say, right, talk me through this. I really want to understand it. And I think if you're prepared to listen and ask questions about whatever subject it might be, that's what being a journalist is all about, really. Mm. And so that's what I did initially with cycling. And then you begin to understand the nuances and you get to understand the characters. And then the real joy of my job is acting as that conduit between the live event. So I'm blessed and lucky to be able to be trackside or pitch side or wherever it is. So I'm there in the moment, and I'm the conduit between you sitting at home watching on your television and the event. And really, as long as I'm putting the context to you and giving you the stories and explaining why this is important, why this particular athlete should be celebrated, or why we want to get to the bottom of any particular story, that's my role. And equally understanding what's happening on the field of play or on the track or on the road, that's the story. I just happen to be there. It's not really about me, it's about that. So I think as long as you understand you're not important in this whole, you're just so not important here, that's important. Let the viewer or the listener or the reader understand what they're seeing and get as much excitement and enjoyment out of what I'm able to be present for.
I think that's very generous of you, because I think something that you do that is almost unique to you is that I see a lot of interviews and athletes can be difficult people to interview because they're very good at one thing, and they're brilliant at this thing, and they come on and they do it fantastically, or they have a very, very bad day and they don't want to talk to you. But I think when you seem to talk to them in a kind of human way, and you often get more than the platitudes. And I think that's a real talent.
I think if you just treat people with respect and win or lose, nobody goes out to do badly. And so I think when they're winning, of course, it's easy. The interviews usually are flowing and full of emotion and excitement. But if an athlete hasn't performed as well as they've hoped or hasn't had the result that they were hoping for, I always think, and whether they're coaches or athletes or whatever they might, whichever sport they might come from, I always go out with that sense of, well, they probably did their absolute best, or they've had an off day, or for whatever reason, I give them an opportunity to explain why something might have gone wrong, but also do it with respect because it's only sport at the end of the day. And yes, it's their lives, but I just think I think you just need to be respectful of people. But equally, we're absolutely privileged to be right there at the heat of the moment, and getting that real immediate response. And also, sometimes I get the chance to talk to athletes and sports people a little bit later when they've had time to reflect, and you get a little bit more depth into an interview there. But the key thing is keeping it really simple. Quite often they've got something they want to say, give them a platform. In my case, stick a microphone in front of them. And I've been really lucky. Some of the sports people I've been able to work with over the years have given me some great interviews, memorable interviews.
I spoke on the podcast a couple of months ago. We had Michelle Gomez from Doctor Who and the flight attendant, and she's wonderful. She's got such amazing energy. And I said to her, would you like to work maybe in a film or in a series with your husband, Jack Davenport? And she immediately went, oh God, no, I wouldn't want to do that. And she said, oh, never work. What was it? She said, never mix church and state. I don't want to be on a set with Jack and then have to go home and start talking about emptying the dishwasher. And I thought, oh, that's interesting because you are married to Carl Hogg, a former international rugby player, and I've seen you on the telly interviewing him. And so I wonder, how do you retain objectivity at that point? Do you just have to get your game face on and go for it?
Absolutely, just do it. And it's really funny because not only have I had to interview Carl before, but a lot of his teammates, the late great Doddie Weir, Gregor Townsend, a lot of these guys are really good friends, or were really good friends in Doddie's case. And I would have to interview them quite often. And yeah, it's quite tricky sometimes. And sometimes you get the giggles. and sometimes they've maybe, in Gregor's case, maybe Scotland head coach, sometimes they haven't played as well as he might have hoped, and I've got to ask the tough questions. But I think, again, if you just try and be really professional about it and get through it, and I also think, particularly with somebody like Sir Chris Hoy, or people that I've known for a very long time and have seen achieve these incredible highs, you've got to be professional when they've won those gold medals, because if you insert yourself into the story and you sort of give them the big hugs, isn't it amazing? That, I think the viewer finds that a little bit exclusive. They think, well, yeah, what you have to be is that sort of link between the viewer and the person who you're interviewing. So I always try and keep it very, very professional and just get the job done, and then be able to celebrate or commiserate, whatever it is. But yeah, with Carl, I have interviewed him a few times. He doesn't say very much. He's a terrible interviewee.
That's funny, that, isn't it? That's correct. But I mean, that's discipline on your part, because rugby has been something, for your whole life. You've grown up with it. You obviously have a great passion for it. And you started doing the rugby on telly it must have been in the 90s. So A, you were very young, and B, you were a woman. So that was kind of breaking the mold a little bit back then.
It was. Back in the day, I was the first sort of woman to present Rugby Special, and it was front page news. It was on the front page of the Scotsman. It was the front page of the Times, I think, at the time. And a lot of people had plenty to say about it, which I thought was quite interesting. And even now, when I look back at some of the comments that were made, you think, jeepers, but it was completely unheard of. And lots of people said, how can you be talking about rugby knowledgeably when you've never played? And I said, well, I'm a journalist, and I used to go down to Thorpe reprocessing plant and talk to workers about nuclear energy. I don't know how to split the atom. I just don't. I'm not a nuclear physicist, but I know how to ask a question. I know what a story is. So it was an interesting time. Now, of course, we've got so many amazing female sports broadcasters, male and female, and I now think it just doesn't matter. If you can do the job, you can do the job. It doesn't really matter who you are. But it was a bit of a novelty back then.
ScotsCare, supporting Scots away from home in London.
Something I did want to talk to you about, and I wanted to talk to you about it as simply as possible so that you could explain it for anyone who doesn't really understand it, is you mentioned Doddie Weir's M.N.D Foundation, and actually, I'll be honest with you, it wasn't something that I'd known much about, and then I did something with Rangers, Glasgow Rangers, for Fernando Rickson, who also died very young at 43. Could you explain to us, for anyone who doesn't know Doddie, who Doddie was and a little bit about M.N.D?
So Doddie was a larger-than-life character, one of my best friends. He was my husband's best friend. He was best man at our wedding, godfather to our kids. Just a brilliant, brilliant bloke, known for turning up in very loud tartan suits. But Doddie, at heart, was a rugby player. So he played for Melrose, Newcastle, the Scottish Borders briefly, and Scotland and the British and Irish Lions. So he was a giant of a rugby player, great big tall second row forward. So he used to leap in the line out, and he was called the Mad Giraffe by the late great Bill McLaren. He was all legs and arms, and he was a farmer and a great raconteur. So he did lots of after dinner speaking. He was a great character. He was just a fun person to know. And in 2016, at the end of the year, he was diagnosed with motor neuron disease, which when he was in his 40s, which for anybody who doesn't know anything about motor neuron disease, M.N.D or ALS, as it's known in the States, it's a neurodegenerative disease, and there's no treatment, no effective treatments. And usually within about a year of diagnosis, you're unable to walk, and majority of people who are given their diagnosis die within 2 years. So you die from the disease very, very quickly. And in the UK, there's usually about 5,000 people living with the disease at any one time. It's not because it's a rare disease, it's just because you die very quickly once you are found to be suffering from M.N.D. And it basically stops all of the muscles in your body working. And if you can't breathe, you can't walk, you can't talk, you can't eat. And so it's a hideous, brutal disease, and it's the disease that if you talk to a GP, it's the one disease that you really don't want to be encountering, and it's just really, really traumatic for the patient, but also for their families. So when Doddie was diagnosed, it came as a terrible shock to all of us. I already knew a little bit about the disease because I knew Joost van de Westhuizen, who was a scrum half, played for South Africa. Stephen Hawking, everybody has kind of heard of him.
Yep.
He lived with the disease for a number of years. You get different types of M.N.D, but some people live for a long time with it if they have lots of interventions to help them breathe, and they often put what's called a peg goes into their stomach, and they're fed directly into their stomach. So some people live longer than others, but it's a really terrible, terrible diagnosis. And so when Doddie was given it, it came as a terrible shock to us all, because there's a man that was invincible, this huge giant of a man full of life, to know that what he was facing, it was really tough for his family, for him, and for all of his close friends. And then very quickly he thought, well, what am I going to do to turn this into a positive? Which I just don't know where he found that resolve and that kind of positivity. But he and I and a number of others like Scott Hastings and John Jeffrey and Finlay Calder and a few other, we formed My Name's Doddie Foundation, a charity, because Doddie was horrified at the lack of hope and the lack of support he felt for people who were given this diagnosis. So we formed the charity, and now it's a multi-million-pound high-functioning charity where we invest huge sums of money. At last count, about £18 million invested into M.N.D research, and we work with the leading researchers and scientists and neurologists and clinicians to try and find effective treatments. And we are making progress, but people have been so incredibly generous over the last few years to really help us raise these incredible sums of money, and then work really closely with the scientific community to make sure we're investing in the best science, the best research that will have the best outcomes for people with this terrible diagnosis.
And another naive question from me, because I did read that your charity has raised so much money. Why does so much money come from the private sector then rather than governmental intervention? Is it just our system?
It's a good question, and we did campaign really hard with the rest of the M.N.D community, M.N.D is Scotland, M.N.D Association, patient groups, to and the scientific community to get the government to commit more money into M.N.D, because there is a feeling that if you crack M.N.D, lots of these other neurological diseases will be able to we'll find treatments for them as a result. So the government did commit some funds, but listen, there's a finite amount of money out there, and obviously different governments have different priorities, and dementia is a huge area of interest because we know how much it's going to cost us all. People are living longer and people have got dementias, and we do want to give people some level of support and try and find a way of giving people treatments for early onset dementia or Alzheimer's. So I think cancer takes a huge amount of money. Research into cancer. There's 1 in 3 of us are going to be touched by cancer at some point in our lives. So listen, there's only so many slices of the cake, and I think for M.N.D we have really, I think, shone a light on this disease because it does have such a huge impact on people. I think we are giving it more attention now. The work of Rob Burrow and Kevin Sinfield, they've certainly helped raise the profile, and we can just do what we can do, and I think we're fully committed to continuing Doddie's legacy to try and get some effective treatments across the line so that people who are given the diagnosis, are given some hope, because I think that's the most desperate thing about it.
Yeah, it is very difficult to stay positive about, isn't it? And I think I read something that you had said that I really liked. You said that and it kind of it resonated with me because my dad had Parkinson's disease, and towards the end of his life, it was kind of like, oh, Ernie with Parkinson's disease, and I kind of got really annoyed. I used to get really annoyed at that because I used to feel as if, hold on, there was a whole lifetime of Ernie without Parkinson's disease, and you said, I don't know if I read it in an interview or something, you said that Doddie never allowed himself to be defined by motor neuron disease, which again shows his strength of character.
Yeah, Doddie was many things to many people, and M.N.D sadly was what took his life in the end, and ended his life prematurely. But he wasn't defined by the fact that he had M.N.D. He was a great family man, absolutely loved by so many people. He was joyful to be around, a huge character, a very talented sportsman, successful businessman. He was many things to all sorts of people, and so M.N.D sadly is what took his life at the end. But he had rich and fantastic life, and he felt very lucky. He used to say, I've been lucky, I've got a wonderful family, I've lived my life, rugby's been good to me. Not everybody's had as much in their lives as I have. So he had an incredible strength of character, and what an amazing positivity he had towards the end.
Can I briefly, before I just wanted to keep you for another couple of minutes, if you don't mind, because I wanted to talk about fitness, and you have spoken about getting fitter as you get kind of like into your 50s recently, and I think it's a big thing. And we often talk on this podcast about being perimenopausal, when we had Ruth Devlin on from a menopause association, and Christine Essen came on, and she's head of Scottish Women in Business, and she was co-founder of the Scottish Business Network. And my wife and I talk about it a lot. But I think it was great that you came out and you were talking about it, and you were talking about finding it harder to lose weight. Are you disciplined about your fitness levels as you've got older?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been very active. I was always quite sporty, and I like to ride my bike, go for a run, or get out for a walk. And I've always been reasonably active. But I think when you sort of get to sort of your middle ages, and you sort of think it's difficult to I think maybe lockdown as well. We all kind of stayed at home and probably ate far too much and drank far too much. But I was still trying to keep active and do a bit of running. Anyway, about 2 or 3 years ago, I was working in a green screen studio, which is the most unforgiving environment of all time, and is not a pleasant thing to be doing. And I looked at myself and I thought, that's unsustainable. You need to sort yourself out. You need to get moving, and So I started being much more disciplined about what I was eating and drinking. So yeah, I mean, it was a sort of 2-year project, but I'm really happy now. I've I'm kind of fighting weight now back to where I should be. I do a lot of strength and conditioning work, so not as much running and more kind of lifting weights, which I do with a bunch of people at 6 o'clock in the morning, just down the road from where I live, and it's hilarious because I'm not lifting the same weights as some of these blokes who are like absolute superpowers. There was like 6 or 8 of us in there with our with either Sophie or Mark who are our instructors, and we love it. I get up at 5:30, 5:45 in the morning, get down there, do an hour. 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm ready for the day. And it makes you feel great. So I'm very disciplined about that. I try to eat really, really healthily. I've always been a healthy eater, and maybe drink a wee bit less than I maybe could. So just, I mean, it's not rocket science. I remember saying to my son, who's now 18, well, he was probably about 16. I said, "Oh, I need to get fit, Johnny. I need to lose a bit of weight. What am I going to do? I need a program." And he said, "Mum, eat less, drink less, and take more exercise."
It is the fun. Yeah, I think that often. Stop eating the pies, Marcus, and you'll probably lose the weight. Are you vegetarian?
I eat some fish. So
Okay.
I'm a farmer's daughter. It's very
Yeah.
difficult conversation in my house, and my kids love meat. So, but I haven't eaten meat for 30 years, but I do eat some fish.
No, we're all vegetarian in our house. I think some people think, because then I moan about not being able to lose weight, and they say, "Well, you're a vegetarian." I said, "Yeah, I can still eat chips and samosas and beer and chocolate, and I just,
Pasta and
yeah,
carbohydrates. Yeah, I know
I still
exactly.
suffer from all these issues." Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But let me ask you one final question, which is a sports question. Um, the halftime show at the World Cup next year, I believe they're extending the halftime from 15 minutes to 30 minutes so they can have a proper American show at halftime. I don't know what I think of that, Joe.
I'd give it a try. It's only 15 minutes. What's the worst that can happen? Do you know what I mean? I just think we overthink an awful lot of things.
Yeah.
We get very caught up in, oh, we don't like change. But I think, does it matter? You know what I mean? Does it matter in the general scheme of things? Does it matter? Give them half an hour. Let's have a show. Get Coldplay on. I love Coldplay. Gives you time of, gives you time. Yeah, I don't think there's any problem with it. I've got no issue with it at all. I don't mind a bit of innovation and a bit of change every now and again. Mix things up sometimes.
You're very pragmatic. You're not a warrior, are you?
What worry about what you can control. Don't worry about the other stuff. My sister is brilliant. She says, "Don't sweat the small stuff." I think, worry about what you can control. The rest of it is just going to happen.
Yeah, my dad used to say that. My dad passed away during COVID when he was 80. And he used to say to me towards the end of his life, and not in a kind of like dramatic way, he used to say, "You got to stop worrying, son. You got to stop worrying." And I don't think he ever really got it. And I don't mean when he died, I got it. I just mean now as I kind of get older, you kind of go, "You're right. What can you control? What's the worst that's going to happen?"
Yeah, I think so. And you try and pass that on to your kids. My parents are the most positive, amazing folks. Like they pretty much said, "The world's your oyster. Go and do whatever you want." There was never any sense that you would be limited in what you could achieve. My folks were like, "Get out there and live your life." And Mum sadly has got dementia, and she's very contented, has a really happy life on the farm, and smiles, and she's loved and cared for and looked after, and she's had a great life. And my dad's still on the farm, still goes up to the farm and shuffles about in his wellies and gets in the way. And they've had a great life, and they've got a brilliant family. And I think just look around you and be blessed with what you've got, because you look at somebody like Doddie and it ended far too soon for him. So I think you look at somebody like Chris Hoy and his wife, who are going through real difficulties with their health, and they've got a beautiful young family. I think look around you, cherish the people in your lives, enjoy your lives, don't sweat the small stuff, because you can't control it.
You're right. I tried to do that. I've got a 6-year-old daughter. I've got my oldest boy is, I think my oldest boy is the same as your girl Rosie, because he's doing his GCSEs this year, and then I've got a 12-year-old Rafe in the middle, and then I've got my little girl Indy is 6, and sometimes I do try to tune into her wavelength a bit more, where we'll be walking home from school and she'll want to just like pick a dandelion or something, and I will, come on, we've got to go, and then you catch yourself going, we're going for what? We're just to be home 5 minutes early or whatever. It's just,
I know. I think we need to be a bit more in the moment,
Yeah.
and consciously present when you're there. So just be present. You don't be sitting on your phone, sitting on your laptop, sitting on your iPad, or just kind of just be there, be present, enjoy the time, and stop. I also think that sometimes when I'm interviewing people, you're always looking for the next thing. Oh, what's next? What's next? Or you've got a game next week, whatever. What about now? Just, think about now. And I think we need to sometimes just catch ourselves for a minute and just think, enjoy where you are at the minute.
Smell the coffee. And talking of that, I might go and make one. Jill, thank you. You've been a breath of fresh air. Jill, what age is your dad? Just the last question, I promise. No more questions. What age is your dad?
Dad's 89. He's 90 in August. The singing Henry is 90 in August, so we'll no doubt be celebrating with some music.
Brilliant. Jill, thank you for joining me today.
Listen, thanks. Lovely to talk to you, Marcus.
You too. See you soon. Taddy bye.
Could you help a fellow Scot in London? Please consider making a monthly donation to ScotsCare, where however much you give, it will make a difference to struggling families, the isolated elderly, or a homeless Scot. Simply go to our website, scotscare.com, and click donate.